see something. Hey, what's good? So we back again to the, you might hold it like this when I give it to you. Just make sure the phone is facing the camera. Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome to yet another interesting episode of Hey, Some Coffee. And in today's episode, I have the same guy, same person I had last time. So this person needs no introduction because this is basically a build-up of the conversation we're having about political correctness and consciousness, the mystery of consciousness. And today's conversation is equally as mysterious because we're going to talk about structured water and biodynamic farming and how that correlates into the truthfulness of witchcraft. It's pretty interesting if you ask me. Sorry, did I just say witchcraft? I meant to say magic. How stupid of me. So, you see, when we're talking about magic, it's a topic that you just brush off the table. We're not saying you should go out there and be ghosts. We're just saying there could be an aspect somewhere in the cosmos that has some room for all these things being mysteriously applicable. It's like it could be true. Who knows? But that is not to say it then goes to show that supernatural realms are brute facts. There's still room for debate, and these are topics that are still surging in academic circles and in social circles. So this is something that we want to talk about today. Hopefully you won't be bored to death, but these are conversations that shape humanity. So yeah, welcome to yet another episode of Hey, Some Coffee, and Keanu is here today to discuss these things with me. So how you doing? And how does it feel to actually continue our conversation, which we had originally started?
I mean, I'm doing aight. I'm doing aight. Sun is out today. Sun is out today. So is the wind and the birds. Yeah. Imagine if the birds didn't show up.
The sun is out and the wind too in the same place at the same time.
Yeah. Imagine if the birds just didn't show up one day. Like, where's the birds? Where are the birds?
The birds kind of bring a certain level of beauty to all this. They're just amazing. Birds and singing and all that thing is just
they're always singing, those guys.
Yeah.
They're always singing. They just don't get tired. They just sing the whole day.
Yeah. And talking of bird singing kind of reminds me of what I read about this evolutionary biologist who was laughed to death because he said birds, when they sing because it's a form of art, not because it's merely a form of communication. Then when he was asked why he felt it was art, because he was like, no, some birds sing so as to attract an opposite sex for the propagation of genes.
Sexual.
So if it's sexual, then it's poetic. Because even us, we sing because it's sexual, because it's poetic.
Yeah.
So that means even birds sing for pretty much the same reasons.
When things get hot like an oven, you just gotta sing.
Yeah. You just gotta sing in the same place at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, but he was really rubbished. And Dawkins, though, in his new book called Flights of Fancy, this is something that he also feels like it's like a poetry. It's like a form of art that birds sing. It's not just mere communication. So Dawkins too kind of like plays around with that idea in the book. And this is something that he said in a conversation with Sean Carroll. And so it's not really unusual. Birds could be singing, It's beautiful, man. They could be doing all these things.
And you see, the thing is, they follow a pattern.
Yeah.
And they follow a sequence. It's not just random notes at random times.
Yeah.
There's some sense to it. Tune. It's a nice tune that's played. Yeah. And it's also interesting that we're talking about birds singing because the tunes that they sing and everything also influence how plants grow.
Oh, for real? How's that? Like when a bird sings a certain way, then a plant grows a certain way.
Yeah.
That's weird. I never heard of that before. How's that even possible?
Well, it's because plants are susceptible to sound. Sound influences plants.
I thought it was light.
And light. Essentially, light is just sound, but at a very high frequency. That it just has to emit this light.
Oh, and talking of plants and light and everything, there was something I came across that was really interesting, I think. How we see color. Yeah, it's like, it's almost as if the color is not on the object, it's in our brains. Yeah, because
Or it's how the light is
it's
bending
different
on the
wavelengths.
object.
Yeah, and it's like different wave. It's because initially it's just white light, and then we see all these different spectrums because of our brains. I don't know.
Perception.
Yeah, so it's like
We're being lied to the whole time. I'm not even white.
it's not even. It's not.
I just look white.
Shut up. But it's not really like we're lied to. Perhaps it's like a created reality for us, because I mean, I'd rather look at it as a form of like synaptic piece of art. You know, your brain makes this reality for you. It creates it for you.
Some like reverse rooted engineered thing that
Imagine
the brain is
having to-
doing for you. Yeah.
Imagine if our cones and whatever it is that those things on
Our retinas.
yes, but imagine if all those things did not have elements of color that helped us see color. The world would be dull, man. It would be like, just imagine a world without color. Arguably, it would be a sad world.
Well, we would be more like snakes. We would use heat signatures instead. Which actually makes me think about the movie. If you guys watch the movie Tenet, one thing about that movie that wasn't consistent with the whole law about when they invert themselves.
Yeah,
How come their eyes didn't emit light?
I've never seen the movie, so
Those of you who have, think about that. When they invert themselves, shouldn't their eyes be emitting light?
yeah.
Not just the normal, you know what I mean.
Well, it's all these interesting stuff that make some of these things weird. Yeah, and to kind of think of how like just like sunlight plays on like water droplets and then forms rainbows and stuff like that, kind of makes you think about, say for example, if growing up we were told if you see a rainbow, it's actually a confirmation that this world will never be drowned. Yeah, speaking.
If you were raised that way.
Speaking euphemistic.
If you were raised somewhere else, we don't know what. We don't know what you were told about rainbows.
Yeah, but if you just look at basic Isaac Newton type science, it's just basically light and reacting with what.
Okay, but what's weird about the whole sun and the whole light thing is that the sun is yellow, but the light it emits is white.
Yeah. That could boil back into what we talked about.
What is going on?
That could boil
The object is yellow, but the white is light. So is white light
the
yellow?
white is light. But perhaps it could boil back into what we're talking about, how our brains tend to see light and stuff like that. But it's just amazing that before this understanding, we had an understanding that, to say the least, was not sound. Then it was replaced by something else. Shows just how progressive knowledge can be in both small ways and big ways. Yeah. Because just that idea, just telling somebody that, it could be something that's not politically correct.
It might be, yeah.
Yeah.
It might be, for sure.
There has to be a structure somewhere, which leads us back to the conversation.
Well, you know, as they say, and by there I mean Plato, knowledge first of all be logical, then consistent. That's the structure of knowledge.
Yeah. Where there's no consistency, there's no logic. But anyway, we digress. We're not here for philosophy. We're here for structured water and biodynamic farming. So when you say water is structured, or when you say structured water, what does that mean? Does that mean water has a structure? And if it has a structure, what's the structure? Is it the mere fact that it can take up the object it occupies?
Well,
or does it have a structure?
You know, essentially,
I can see water having a structure.
Yeah.
So what do you mean structured water?
You know, it's essentially water. Structured water is water that's structured. That's what it is.
Now we're being...
That's what it is. It's in the name. Essentially, when you see water from a surface, it all looks the same. Maybe some is clearer than others.
Yeah.
But on a molecular level, there's a difference on a molecular level. And when you look at, for example, when people look at snowflakes,
yeah,
when they see the snowflakes and the geometries and the patterns that it has,
yeah,
on a molecular level, water has something like that going on as well, but in its molecules. Certain molecules have structure. If the water is structured, then the molecules will have structure like that, the way the snowflake would look.
Oh, so the structure is not necessarily in the physicality of the water. It's basically at a molecular level.
On a molecular level.
If you say that, it's not as weird an idea if you think about it. But one thing I'd like to say though, no, before I say that. So it's structured at a molecular level.
On a molecular level.
But then everything seems to be structured at a molecular level. So that's not, well, what's peculiar?
Yeah, but there's different
what stands
structures.
So what basically stands out about water being structured? That's worth conversation there.
Well, when you look at the snowflake, for example, it has symmetry and beauty. It's not just some random structure. You can see that it's actually constructed very well in such a way that it has symmetry and beauty. So structured water has a structure that has symmetry and beauty. It's not just something that is just put together in some random way.
Okay.
Without symmetry and beauty.
So what would you say is the central importance of water having a structure? What does that materialize into at the end of the day?
Yeah, so water has this ability.
And before you say the answer to that question, if we're talking about structured water, then obviously there's a contrast. There must be water that isn't structured, right?
Yeah.
So like what tears them apart? Married to that question I asked you prior to the one I'm saying right now.
A good example is like when you look at my face, you can imagine if it wasn't like the nose wasn't this size to the lips to the chin, it wouldn't have a nice structure to it.
Yeah.
So it's the same with water. Water has to have a structure for it to have a certain kind of symmetry, but that also plays a role in how it influences and affects what is around it as well. And yes, then there is water which is not structured, which now the molecules do not have symmetry and beauty. And why it's important is because when water has a structure to it, it gives it now properties which makes it more usable or more absorbent. So plants are able to absorb the water much easier when the water has structure. Even our bodies are able to absorb the water a lot easier into our cells.
So taking it away from the base layer of it, which is the plants and all that stuff. So away from the plants, so if it has a structure at a molecular level, does that make it more does that give it a certain level of proclivity towards bringing about life or playing a part in what constitutes life? Because
what is life?
Yeah, that's another complicated question. But what I mean is just microbial life even. Because most people tend to think as though water is very rare in the universe.
But it's not, is it?
It's not.
It's not, is it?
It really isn't.
For all we know, there's water on the sun. Right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
Could be. But I doubt. But
they haven't made advanced probes enough. They can get close enough and just get like a sample.
But
and then bring it back to it.
Okay, but on a serious note, the water is not rare in the universe, and
it's not rare.
That kind of explains a little bit of why we even have this fascination for Mars exploration, because there were craters there and there are water bodies that allegedly dried up, and we have seen this firsthand with the probes that we've sent there. And
how do we know somebody just didn't get like some like forklift and then just like carve routes in Mars to make it look like there was water there?
Well, that somebody would have to go there, but right now going there is practically not feasible. So the thing is, there was water at some point there. That's what raises all this fascination about maybe there could be even some sort of like fossils left off, because if we could just find life elsewhere.
So you're talking about like Mars dinosaurs.
Well, fossils are not only for dinosaurs, but even
maybe that's how the dinosaurs look on that side.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe for them, something the size of an ant is a dinosaur. We don't know how big the people are on Mars.
Yeah, there could be even microbial life. Who knows? But my point is that for life to come up, there has to be an aspect of, like, this structured water you're talking about has to also play a part into.
Like water is so essential for life to exist. That's what you're saying, right?
But it doesn't have to be ordinary water.
Yeah.
I'm trying to marry it to what you're saying. It has to be perhaps structured water. Is that the argument you are trying to make?
No, because water can exist. It's the only substance that can exist in all the three states. Solid,
and
liquid,
if we say that,
and gas.
And if we say that, if we say that the water that can only hold the potential to contribute towards bringing about life is structured water, then if we haven't seen life elsewhere in the universe aside from our planetary home, then the water that's that side is not structured. It's a water that doesn't have a pattern and a symmetry. Is that what you're saying?
No, what we're saying is that when water does have that, it can now actually more facilitate life compared to when it doesn't have that.
But even the one that doesn't have a structure is actually...
Well, that's how we're alive, because most of the water we take today is not structured.
Okay, so now tell us. Tell me, like, what makes water structured, and how do you know this particular body of water is structured, or this water isn't?
Well, you know, because you can see its molecules.
No, you can't see its molecules.
Well, you need to be able to see its molecules to know for certain that it's structured. But if you can't see that if you can't see its molecules, if you lack the equipment, because
so there
if
shouldn't
you're
be.
poor,
So there shouldn't be like a house owner apart to have to even tear apart what structured water is. And
no,
what isn't.
the easiest way to tell what structured water from non-structured water is essentially how it feels. Structured water is more absorbent.
How can you even know how it feels? Because all water feels the same.
Okay, well, I guess you'd have to be somewhat trained to know the difference of waters. Is what one would feel a little bit like softer, it'd be more softer on the skin, and one would be a little bit harder on the skin. Or when you drink it, one feels way more refreshing. Like you can take the same quantity of water, but one just feels way more satisfying and refreshing when you drink it. Like water from a spring. When you drink water from a spring, it feels so refreshing. Like it's like it's almost orgasmic. You know, it's like it's just like that glass of water was so good. It tasted. It also tasted so nice as compared to water that isn't really structured.
Well, it
would feel more like.
Well, I sure as hell need training to test out water and tell apart which water.
Well, that's because you're trying to do it.
All water feels like water.
You're trying to like feel the difference without using equipment. So you have to do it intuitively, where you can tell, okay, this is a bit more.
But my intuitions can't even wrap around what you're saying.
Yeah, but that's the simplest way, because water that is structured is more absorbent. It goes into the cells way easier than water that isn't structured.
Okay.
Same with plants. If you want to test structured water to non-structured water, when you water a plant with structured water, that plant will grow way better than a plant that is just grown with regular tap water or that Viagra, if you like. If you can get enough Viagra to water your garden. I was playing in my it played wrongly in my head when you said right. No, but I think it's intentional because sex sells. So when you see the bottle of water, you read like I want this brand.
But it's not called Viagra.
It's called what?
It's Vatra.
But me I read it as Viagra. That's the weird thing. The way they've spelled it and the way they put the word so carefully, it's like...
No, those intonations you're using are for the wrong ones. Okay. So now what I'm saying is, how does... If water is structured in a way, does it have an aspect... Does it have like a certain level of... No. In our conversations, prior to this conversation, you had said something about water, since it's structured water having to bear some aspect of it's like alive.
It's like
what the heck did you mean the water is alive?
Well, when you look
how
at
can water be alive?
Yeah, when you look at the properties of water,
I just don't understand how water could honestly be alive.
How it could be alive? Well, like
I really don't get how water is alive. Okay, seriously. Yeah.
Well, you see, for water to be alive, other properties of water is that it also has electrical and magnetic aspects to it. That's one of the things. So when it's more electrically charged or magnetically charged, it almost behaves as if it's alive. And that's where you hear a lot of these myths about people talking to a river spirit and things like that, is because...
Oh, now we're talking about Moana.
Yeah, Moana.
Sounds
and that's where the concept came from, is because water has these properties to it, whereby it can have structure, it carries an electrical charge, it also carries a magnetic charge in it as well. It has these properties to it. And that's where the whole concept for Moana and things like Moana came from.
And water bending.
Yeah. Well, water bending is more about us interacting with the water and the water interacting with us at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Concurrently.
Yeah. That's what water bending is more like, pushing and pulling. But it's it's cooperating. We cooperate with the water,
All right. So just to be wary of the time, we're trying to keep this max 25 minutes. Let's talk about magic and how structured water boils down to biodynamic farming, and how that goes to show to some extent that magic isn't as silly as we thought.
Okay, magic is silly because you can imagine saying that if you just put water through a vortex.
What is a vortex?
It's a vortex. It's that thing. It's a spiral.
Yeah.
That goes round and round. And
so
round,
any spiral is a vortex.
And round. And round. And round.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Earth going around the sun. Yeah. It's essentially like almost like a vortex, but a vortex starts from a big space and then it slowly gets smaller and then maybe will open up again. and it's a cone-like shape, the vortex.
Right.
And so water just passing through something like that in the right length and size and diameter would structure it over time. It's just something as simple as that. Does sound a bit silly. That's all it takes.
Okay, but
Clockwise, anti-clockwise.
Now I'm a little confused. How does
interchanging directions.
How does that then play into magic?
Into magic.
Because magic, yeah, like
it's because in water has a property called surface tension. That's why when you pour water like from a glass or a container, it'll grab onto the glass a little bit before it actually flows off. It won't just pour out at the end there unless it has a special devised cone at the end. Even when you pour water on your hand, it's able to hold on. So when water is in a vortex, it's essentially grabbing onto itself. And so its molecules are essentially rubbing against each other and grabbing onto each other. And that over time now, when it's passing through the correct size of a vortex and length, it creates an electrical charge and a magnetic charge as well. And that's when the water seems to be as if it's alive. And that's why people go to like water springs in certain parts of certain mountains, they come back saying things like, I saw a vision, because the magnetics and the electrics in that particular area are much higher because the water is passing through the correct kind of a vortex.
So it's not magic in the colloquial sense of the word.
It's not.
It's just people getting this stuff.
Misinterpreting what's happening in nature.
But because initially you had overhyped me when we were having this conversation prior to this. It's like you almost had some sort of academic explanation for why there's magic in the first place.
That's why there is magic in the first place, because
but that is not magic.
As people, we have an aspect of our bodies that is electric and magnetic. And so whenever we come into electrical fields or magnetic fields that are being excited through things like vortexes in water or outside of water, or other electrical and magnetic fields that are coming from the stars and the planets, we tend to now think this is magic, when actually it's just being in a certain wavelength or spectrum where that energy is more concentrated or higher due to certain factors like the stars, or like the water flowing in a vortex, and its molecules are constantly exciting each other, and it creates a much higher charge or a much higher magnetism. And then you come into that field and it starts to feel like magic when it isn't.
So it's not necessarily grown-ass women flying on broomsticks.
Well, we don't know what kind of magnetics and electrics they're using, but I mean, I would really love to know more about how they make a broom float. Because essentially everything has a magnetic property to it. If you put wood in a strong enough magnetic field, it's going to float.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know how they're doing it, but they're doing it.
Okay, so there's one aspect. It's just slipped off my mind. I wanted us to dwell on before we close. What the heck did I want to ask?
Well, I mean, while you're thinking about that, I mean, I made you lose it, right? So you see now, when you start now using things like structured water in things like agriculture, you're able to now increase the vitality and enrich the plants as well, because they're getting something that is more nutrient to them, because the water itself is more charged with life in a sense. And that's why using things like structured water in things like farming is more beneficial, because you don't need to use as much fertilizer anymore and everything, because the water itself was already enriched enough. And that's where biodynamic farming comes in, because biodynamic farming, one of the core parts of biodynamic farming is using things like structured water.
Okay. So in wrapping, this is what, 24 minutes in. Pick the most bits and pieces that are interesting to somebody who new to this topic, like myself.
When you talk about biodynamic farming is farming with nature as a whole. So you don't just farm using things like artificial fertilizers and things like that. You try to mimic what is happening in nature. So the fact that water has these properties that are electric and magnetic, you try to artificially now replicate them through certain preps and techniques to help you increase your yields in farming. When you look at certain stories, even in the Bible, it's like how like Joseph was able to grow enough grain for 7 years of a famine. How was he able to have such yields and such produce to have that much grain for such a time? And so when you look at now biodynamic farming, it starts to shed some light on how things that can be possible even in our time. And so employing these methods would now be able to for us to increase organic farming, but on an industrial level without having to use GMOs and things like that. But it seems like it's magic because you're harnessing the electromagnetic spectrum. So even things like waiting for the planets to be aligned a certain way will influence how plants will grow. energy coming from the stars also influences not just us but even the plants because of the electromagnetic properties of crops as well as our bodies. And that's why it starts to seem like it's magic, but it's not really magic. But what's more interesting is that once you understand that there are these forces at work, you can start to now try and artificially recreate them because of how technology is advancing. So even making things like a star, you can artificially replicate a star or the energy coming from a star, which can actually influence plant growth and even human growth as well. And we know that what we eat does also influence us. So if our crops are grown a certain way, it's also going to influence how we grow a certain way. Even certain things, like when we talk about things like consciousness, you may be surprised that just what you eat can influence your consciousness. And that's why it's such an interesting topic to actually look into, because it opens a lot of avenues for health, cosmetics, and let's just say alternative medicines as well. It starts to open up a lot of those avenues.
And if consciousness can be influenced by what you eat, that
But what about your life? Think about your lifespan.
Unfortunately makes it so material. What?
Think about your lifespan.
Yeah. That's very true.
So now, what's also of interest before we actually close?
Yes, we need
to think about this. You know that they said that there's that whole myth about the fountain of youth.
Yes.
Where they said that there's a fountain of youth, if you drink from it, you will live forever. But why was it compared to a fountain and not a fruit or something you rub on?
Because the ancients realized there's life in water.
Yeah, because of how water is so essential to life, and because of all the properties of water that actually influence life. And that's why it was a fountain of youth. And how water coming from a spring or a fountain has much more healthy and revitalizing properties than water coming from a tap. And so it's a very interesting topic because water is in everything, and it's the only substance that can exist in all three states. And it's in practically everything